Awesome. All right. So where we're gonna pick it up is where we left off, which is going to be on page 158. And we're in the chapter A Vision for You. And so what we kind of covered over the last few weeks was the real early beginnings of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so last week, because it's all on Rob, I'm taking no personal responsibility. Everyone look at Rob. We made sure, yeah, I like doing it too. We made sure to finish up Dr. Bob's nightmare. And also what we spoke about, yeah, Dr. Bob's nightmare, woo, pew, pew, pew. I don't know why I'm like this. I do a lot of inventory, so I should have some self-awareness. Um, and then we got a good lens into AA number 3 and the third AA member to get sober. And now as we pick up at the bottom of 158, what we're going to see is the story of a gentleman by the name of Ernie Galbraith. And he is going to be AA number 4. Now, his story is not a happy one. I won't tell all of it because some of it's a little much. But I'll tell you some of the more humorous aspects about that sort of anecdote as we dive in. So, very bottom paragraph 158. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town. By the way, if you're wondering, that town, Akron, Ohio. Woo, Ohio. I heard the kids use Ohio as an insult. How could you? The Buckeye State. I know, but Ohio. So here Cleveland rocks. I was there. It did. So the town is Akron, Ohio. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town. And this is important, who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. And what we're talking about is working with others. 12-step work, it's not optional. You know what I mean? Like, it's part of this deal. Like, if I want sobriety, like if I want permanent, contented sobriety, I've got to work with others. I've got to help others. To be sunk is to drink again. To be sunk is to use again. That is what that means. So if I want this thing, I've got to work with others. So after several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. This is our guy, Ernie Galbraith. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. And there's 2 things I'll point out about that. The first thing is that it is possible. Yeah, you got some of that history in the chat. Ooh, spoilers in the chat. That's what I should just do whenever you put some in the chat, Rob. I should just be like, spoilers in the chat. And then everyone would be like, ooh, spoil it for me. um, so he proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. And there's 2 things that I want to point out about that. 2 things could possibly be true. One is that could definitely be a sign of the mental obsession, because that's what the mental obsession looks like to people on the outside. See, I don't know about you, but I came to and I promised you I did not want to do it again. I meant it with every bottom of 158. I meant it with every, I got you. I meant it with everything that was in me. I did not want to do it again. And I did it again. And doesn't that look like, does she want to quit or not? Do you know what I mean? And sometimes we hear things in the rooms which are just a misunderstanding of the illness, like they didn't want it enough, or they weren't trying it hard enough, or why didn't they just call before they picked up? Because I can't, because that is the power of this illness. You know what I'm saying? So it is possible that is pointing to his mental obsession. It is also possible that is pointing to a bit of ambivalence, where maybe he didn't really want to quit. 2 things could be true. So I just wanted to lay forward my 2 theories, and in part because I'm going to tie back to that. So they were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. A young person not interested in their parents' religion? Shocking. But, they were deeply religious and it was a struggle for them. He suffered horribly from his sprees. And I want to point out that to me is a sign of the physical allergy. So that to me is a sign that once he starts, he cannot stop. That sign that once he takes a drink, he's gone, because there are people, I don't think us, I don't think we are those people, but there are people that will stop before they drink their way into horrific physical, spiritual, emotional, and financial consequences. They get probably nowhere near consequences, and they're like, I've had enough, thank you. And I take a drink, and that drink's like, more, please. And I have more, and I just blow right through those consequences because I can't control the amount that I take. Anyone in here ever suffer horribly from your drinking? Yeah. Sounds like a little like Ernie. Yeah. Everyone's like, yeah, right? If I had the ability to control the amount that I took, I would stop before vomiting at 3 a.m. You know what I mean? I would stop before the agony that next morning. You know what I mean? I would stop before broken hearts and broken relationships. You know what I mean? I would stop before that. He's got the allergy. So, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. Again, maybe just a little inkling that he might be beyond human aid. He consented, however, to go to the hospital, where he occupied the very room recently vacated by the lawyer. So AA number 3, Bill Dodson, right? He had 3 visitors. I want to point that out. That is how willing that these guys were to work with others. It wasn't like, you guys got it, somebody will take the newcomer. They knew that they had to work with others to stay well, so they were after it, you know? I got to make the approach. I got to reach out. I want to get after it. Yeah, and the 3 visitors, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob, and Bill Dodson. And they're sitting down with Ernie Galbraith, the devil may care young chap. I just like, could you imagine if that was sort of your legacy, to be known as a devil may care, like just, and some of you are like, yeah, Paige, you're a little off the handle, old devil may care, All right. So he had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, the way you fellows put this spiritual stuff makes sense. And that to me sounds like his second step. He is open to the belief that there could be a solution for his illness. Spiritual awakening, sufficient to overcome alcoholism? That makes sense. That sounds like a step 2 to me. He doesn't need to overthink it. He doesn't need to over intellectualize it. None of that. So, then he says, I'm ready to do business. And when he says, I'm ready to do business, some of you guys know that is his 3rd step decision. He's ready to do the deal. What's the deal? The 12 steps. For us, as outlined in this book, he made that decision. He was going to do this work. And this, man, when you're a young person, not like me, we're joking about how old I am before the meeting. So old. But when you're a young person, this is a real act of humility. So he says, I guess the old folks were right after all. When you're young, and then like there's no greater humility than that. So one more was added to the fellowship. And so to talk a little about Ernie Galbraith and his story, and again, just some of the more humorous anecdotes, is Ernie Galbraith, he didn't stay sober. And of course, I point out maybe he didn't have that, full like, hey, I want to do this thing. You know what I mean? And keep in mind, in modern 12-step, it's never what happened. When somebody relapses and we hear AA number 4, he didn't stay sober. We want to do a deep dive investigation. What happened? Was the wind blowing from the northwest a little too strongly? Was there too many Buckeyes in the Buckeye State? Like, what was it? What caused the relapse? Listen, I'm not anti-Buckeye. Like I'm very neutral to the nut. I don't know if I have a nut allergy. I don't have a nut allergy, so I'm neutral. It's just random. But like, what happened? Well, what do we know to be true is that if I have this illness, if I have alcoholism, or let's say addiction, or whatever brings you to this all-inclusive study, if I have this illness that's outlined in this book, what I know to be true, it is not a matter of if I relapse, it is a matter of when. I will relapse. That is a step 1 idea. And so the only thing that I have to put between me and the first drink or the first use or the first whatever that brings you here, the only thing that I got is a spiritual awakening. And so before I come to Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step in general, there's one reason for relapse. It is the inevitability of the relapse. Now, once I come to 12-step, AACA, DAA, GAOA, whatever brings you here, there's one other reason, and it is a failure to grow spiritually. How do I grow spiritually? These 12 steps is a way of life. So I don't know what happened, but I do know that somebody like Ernie Galbraith, somebody like me, is destined to drink again. And what I know from experience is that if I do not do this work, this as a way of life, these 12 steps out of this book as a way of life, a time and place will come, I will relapse. Now, the more humorous aspect of this story is that Ernie Galbraith, he gets drunk. And you know when you've been somewhere many a time, but you drank yourself into just the MapQuest that was in your brain. That's an old reference. The Google Maps in your brain is gone. You know what I mean? And you are lost and you can't find your way around Akron, Ohio. You know what? I'm sure some of you guys know what that's like. A shoe might be missing or two. You might have a third one in your pocket. Who's this shoe? You know? And so Ernie Galbraith was a little bit that drunk, and he knows, he does the thing that no alcoholic would ever do, which is get hammered and then call their sponsor and be like, help, So he was drunk, and he was trying to get his way to Dr. Bob's house, and he was going in laps in Akron, he was bouncing around, couldn't find it, and he runs into this pretty young woman. In a moment, his drunk breath is taken away, and he is like, oh, do you happen to know where, Dr. Bob's house is? And she's like, why, yes, I do. Let me take you there. And that was Dr. Bob's daughter. Oh, you know what I mean? Like, oh, and that starts this horrid love affair between the absolutely inebriated Ernie Galbraith and Dr. Bob's daughter. Oh, you know what I mean? Like, and listen, if you're ever like, man, I don't know if I was able to help that sponsee, I don't know how bad that's pretty, like, oh yeah, if you're like, man, I don't know if I could sponsor. Dr. Bob did it, and that was the worst case scenario. You know what I mean? And so Ernie Galbraith and his daughter, not Anne, what's her name? Ruth, I think. Hold on, Rob's got it. They got married. What happened is that Dr. Bob and Anne, this might be a surprise to all of you, did not, shockingly, approve of this marriage. They were not like, oh boy, this is a good idea. And so what happened is they got married. Ernie was drunk, and it was just, a friend of his or a family member of his that was there. And it was not a happy marriage, and it did not, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it was Susan, I think it was Sue. I don't know. I can be wrong. Listen, frequently wrong, as my sponsor will point out. And it was, yeah, did not go well, but eventually they did divorce, and she ended up with a high school sweetheart. So that's the slight little happy story to that story that does not have a happy ending. So, but the point of that is, well, we got to work with others, and we got to keep doing this deal. You know what I mean? I'm not immune from a relapse. In fact, a relapse is inevitable for somebody like me. So all this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, that's our guy, Bill Wilson, Billy Dubs from New York City. I was joking about the Appletinis before as well. I'm like, an Appletini. I know. I'm going to get a very strongly worded email before this. We're getting it. Like, do not call New Yorkers that page. But he's from New York, so he was living in Akron for several months. So all this time, our friend of the hotel lobby incident, Bill W., remained in that town. He was there 3 months. He now returned home, leaving behind his first acquaintance, the lawyer and the devil-may-care chap. So his first acquaintance, just if you're trying to keep all these guys straight, the first acquaintance is Dr. Bob. The lawyer is Bill Dotson, and the devil-may-care chap is Ernie Galbraith, Ernie G's. And so these men had found something brand new in life. And some of you guys know I love finding sneaky things in the big book, just sneaky anything. Like I'm not like, oh, it's gotta be sneaky this or that. No, no. But I love sneaky descriptions of the spiritual awakening. Also my sneaky prayers, sneaky promises. And I think this is a beautiful, sneaky description of what a spiritual awakening is. Finding something brand new in life. You know what I mean? That's what they found. Something brand new, an awakened spirit. And it says they knew that they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober. I gotta help others. If I want to stay sober, I've got to work with others. Don't worry if you're not sponsoring others or you're afraid to sponsor. I promise, like the purpose of this is to help you do that, and that it is as bad as it can be. Like if you're showing up if you're showing up to this big book study, one, super glad you're here, but it's bad. Like it's bad. Like you have got a bad case of this thing. If you're listening to me, Nataron, you know what I'm saying? It's bad. So if you're working with somebody, it's already a fatal case. You know what I mean? You can't make it worse. And if you sit down with this book, your experience and the power of God flowing through you, heck, you might even just help. And if you got any like adult children, just maybe keep them away. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I'm making a Ernie Galbraith joke, which is the pinnacle of my humor already. So they knew that they must help others if they would remain sober. And here, for those of you, yeah, sorry, I got excited because I saw, heck, I'm going on this tangent. Uh, sorry, guys. So if Dr. Rob's house, Rob put a picture of that in the chat. Now I got to go there. I didn't go in the front door. And some of you are like, is it because you aren't refined enough to let you in the front? No, it's because, as Rob pointed out, there are 12 steps to get into Dr. Bob's house. Now that wasn't added on. That's how it always was. And we had a tour guide, which I love. We just make best friends with him because I'm in for all the nerd stuff. I'm like, oh, tell me everything. Who cooked fish in the microwave? Like I'm here for everything. But he pointed out that there is a little like platform, like in the physical steps on step 3 and step 7. Ooh, little fun fact. But yeah, I went in the back way where there was only like 5, so I could climb up. I just scooted my way around that thing, and they were very allowing me to just crawl around. So it was great. So back to what I'm actually supposed to be talking about. They knew that they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober. That motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. Man, at first we sponsor because we have to. And then we do it because, man, there's something here that works. There's like in in other fellowships like CA, that kind of joke about the God dope. You know what I mean? Like that's the God dope. That was everything that I was looking for in a bottle. That was everything I was looking for in a pipe. That was everything I was looking for, is watching the lights come on in somebody's eyes. You know what I mean? Like a new light fill their spirit that is not my own. Like to see that happen, that is incredible. And that's the good stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like this is an experience you must not miss. We know you will not want to miss it. Like, this is the stuff. So it was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. Again, it is not a codependent trying to rearrange their life, trying to control their life. It is offering this way of life to those who want it. I always joke that the steps are consensual. And I'm here for enthusiastic consent. Let's dive in, we're not going to force you to do anything. But those who want it, man, there's a joy. A joy. When you're sitting down with somebody and they're interested and they're relating to what's going on in this book and they're taking direction, man, you know what it's like, how incredible that is. So they shared their homes, their slender resources, and gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. And again, that kind of gives us the laser beam focus into kind of what early 12-step work looked like, because they didn't have the luxury of detox centers or rehabs or those sorts of things. And they really had to be in the trenches with these guys. And I will point out, it says they gladly devoted their spare hours to fellow sufferers. I always point out, if I'm not mildly inconvenienced, I don't have enough sponsees. I need to be at least a little bit mildly inconvenienced. You know what I'm saying? And if I am mildly inconvenienced, wonderful. You might have room for one more. But what I will say is you're allowed to have hobbies. You know what I mean? I don't seem to hobbies, sort of. But like, and I then try to give a list of hobbies. I'm like, you could crochet or jump out of an airplane. I don't know what hobbies are. You know what I mean? But you can do that. Uh, but it is those, and you can have a job, you can work, you can do all those things. But like our spare hours. So my spare hours spent working with others. And I promise you, it is, oh, maybe well, you know what? You know what? Here's what I'll say. This is a little thing that it will bite me in the butt, and I know it's coming. I will tell you that working with others is more exhilarating than jumping out of an airplane. And if you want to prove me wrong, you know what that means. You got to do two things. You got to go jump out of an airplane at your discretion, parachute, please, and go work with others and tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. And I'm here for that. And if that is your motivation to do the 12 steps and sponsor others, good enough for me. You know what I mean? It'll get it done. And then you decide what you want to do about the parachuting thing. So, or more relaxed. No, I don't know. I was trying to tie it into crochet. I'm like, I don't got it. So, they were willing by day or night to place a new man in the hospital and visit him afterward. So to take them to the Akron City Hospital, to take them to essentially a detox and to visit them, to follow up, to take them through this work. So it says they grew in numbers. They experienced a few distressing failures, but in those cases, they made an effort to bring the man's family into a spiritual way of living, thus relieving much worry and suffering. And what I want to point out is that this is a way of life. That these 12 steps, not a set it and forget it program. This is a way of life. This is how I live my life. And then it says, when it says thus relieving much worry and suffering, if you want to make a note, see page 97, because one of the things I love to do is tie in these later chapters to really what we read at the rest of the book, because sometimes we think the later chapters are little tag-ons or add-ons, but really they're continuing themes that we saw from the Roman numerals all the way through to the end of the 164 and Dr. Bob's Nightmare, because we can't forget that. That's for Rob. I also really like his night. I like his story too. Like it's not, I like to shenanigan. All right. So let's go to the bottom of page 97. And we're going to go to the very bottom full paragraph. And it says, though an alcoholic does not respond, there is no reason why you should neglect his family. You should continue to be friendly to them. The family should be offered your way of life. Should they accept, so again, that this is a way of life, not a set it and forget it deal, but should they accept and practice spiritual principles? And for me, the principles are the tangible actions of these 12 steps. So should they accept and work these steps as a way of life themselves, there's a much better chance that the head of the family will recover, so the alcoholic. And even though he continues to drink, the family will find life more bearable. So this is not a new idea. This is what early AA looked like. So back to page 159, bottom paragraph. A year and 6 months later, so that's a year and a half. I like to say it in different ways because sometimes it just doesn't click. So a year and a half. These three have succeeded with 7 more. Seeing much of each other, scarce an evening passed, and someone's home did not shelter a little gathering of men and women, happy in their release. That release is that release from the bondage, the chains of alcoholism, but I also think the bondage of self that we talk about in the 3rd step prayer. Happy in their release from that. And that, again, another beautiful description, sneaky though, of the spiritual awakening, what that looks like. It looks like a release. It looks like freedom from that which was compelling me. You know what I mean? Compelling me to drink again. Freedom from the mental obsession. And it says constantly thinking how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. Now, again, this is not a new idea. Page 20, very top of page 20, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we might help meet their needs. Top of page 20. I'm like, oh, I'm like, I'm back on 159, but I can see people are still going to 20. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I should slow down. But I'm also like, I don't know if we're gonna finish all of it today or not. And that's one of those things. Who knows? I don't. Welcome, guys. I'm glad you're here. The most of the people are on page 20, but we're going back to page 159. So 159 for those that just joined us. Glad you made it. So very bottom paragraph. So it says constantly thinking of how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. In addition to these casual get-togethers, it became customary to set apart one night a week for a meeting to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. So what I want to point out, top of 160, that this is a way of life. This is not a set it and forget it program. But also, some of you guys are like, I have heard that every Monday. And if you go to the other big book compendium meetings, probably like everyone, right? It's like, oh, it's kind of like when they say the title of a movie in the movie, it hits me with that excitement. We finally made it to page 160, rock and roll. So aside from fellowship and sociability, the prime object, so the main purpose, and the takeaway is this is the main purpose of meetings. This is why we have meetings. Its main purpose, so the main prime object, was to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. So the purpose of meetings is for those of us who have recovered to offer a solution to those that are new. And some of you guys are like, wait, does that mean that if somebody's new and they're like, listen, I've got problems, let me tell you about it and take the meeting hostage? No. I just want to contextualize that as well. No hostage taking. What this is about is if I have this illness, my main problem is that I cannot stop myself from taking the first drink or the first drug. That is my main problem. It's driven by a conscious separateness from God, but I don't know that, when I get here. And so my responsibility to those that are new is to offer this way of life, to offer this solution. And that is the purpose of meetings. But I'm also not ignoring the fact that there is fellowship and sociability. I'm also not ignoring the fact that you go to a meeting, you feel better after, most of them. The other ones that you don't feel better after, you got some inventory to write about or a step 10 to do about how the jerks were doing it wrong at the meeting, and then you get closer to God anyways and feel better anyways. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, so that does happen, and it is wonderful to go to meetings, but as we point out and talk about, it is not a solution. The solution is the spiritual awakening, is the result of the 12 steps. So outsiders became interested. Now, I will point out they're not like super outsiders. They were Oxford group members, and one man and his wife. Now, this is T. Henry and Clarence Williams, and they were in the Oxford group. And we spoke about, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but we spoke about how the Oxford group had a prayer group for Dr. Bob, where they shared transparently their struggles and they prayed as a group for his sobriety. And then the answered prayer was a silly little drunk from New York City who said, I'm a hopeless drunk, and I got to work with somebody to stay sober. That was the answered prayer. Now where that prayer circle happened, that prayer group happened, was at T. Henry and Clarence Williams' home, and that is in Akron, Ohio. And if you want to be a weirdo, it's not a weirdo. I was going to say stalk them. Don't stalk them. Please be respectful. But the address, I got the address. That's just my little warning before we go into that. It's 676 Palisades Drive. And I'm sure Rob's got stuff in the chat all about that. So one man and his wife placed their large home at the disposal of this strangely assorted crowd. And in the early days, they would have, these people seeking spirituality and then puking drunks, you know what I mean? Just showing up. And I believe it was in New York that the alcoholics were known as the drunk squad of the Oxford movement, drunk squad. Alcoholics Anonymous, a little more refined, but every once in a while, drunk squad, here we go, right? So this couple has since become so fascinated that they have dedicated their home to the work Many a distracted wife has visited this house to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problems. So in this context, the non-alcoholics, the family members. That there was again, this was not a way of life that was just for the main sufferer. It was a way of life for anyone who was suffering. Um, so, who to find loving and understanding companionship among women who knew her problem, to hear from the lips of their husbands what had happened to them, their experience with the spiritual awakening, the 12 steps, and their experience with alcoholism. To be advised about how her own wayward mate might be hospitalized and approached when he next stumbled. Many a man, yet dazed from his hospital experience, has stepped over the threshold of that home into a new freedom. Now, some of you guys might have a little note that says, see page 41. We don't have to go there, but on page 41, we play this game with Fred where we're like, let's try to find Fred's triggers, like what triggered him to drink? And it's like, was it a cloudy day? No, a cloud in the sky, huh? He was out of town. Well, he had been out of town before. Then we find that he dressed for dinner and crossed the threshold of the dining room. And we sort of make that joke. Thresholds, that's his trigger. All he's got to do is avoid all thresholds. And then as we go to this, I make the joke that thank goodness we don't have to watch our triggers. Thank goodness we have a solution, an answer, one of weight and depth that I don't have to avoid all doorways, because that'd be tricky. And that not only that, but we get to step over the threshold of that home into new freedom. And something that's interesting about the word threshold, because I'm fun and I look up words and I got my 1930s dictionary, but something that's interesting about that is a threshold connects one plane to another, and it's where we step from one plane to another. And isn't that what happens here? I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Drug Addicts Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Codependents Anonymous in one threshold. And I take a series of steps, and that leads me into a whole new plane of existence, that fourth dimension of existence. Go from that third dimension to that fourth dimension. I go from I can't stay sober and I hate myself and I hate who I am to a spiritual awakening on the other side. So threshold into a new freedom. Many an alcoholic who has entered there came away with an answer, and that's what we have, a solution. He succumbed to that gay crowd inside who laughed at their own misfortune and understood his. And that's kind of my responsibility to those that are new, to be able to laugh at myself, not at others. But that thing when you go to a meeting and people are laughing and they're able to not take themselves too seriously, and there's a light on in their eyes and there's a hope in their spirit. That's my responsibility to those that are new, to those that are struggling to live my life in such a way that it's like, man, there's something there. There's something there that I don't have. Impressed by those who visited him at the hospital, he capitulated entirely. Now, what does the word capitulate mean? It means to surrender. Now, listen, I am pedantic, and sometimes you might show up and you might have some people say, hey, did you know the word surrender is not found in the first 164 pages of this book? And, that's true. That's true. But if you want to be pedantic right back, that's not spiritual at all. But like, we don't want to play table tennis with pedantry. But if you wanted to play pedantic pickleball, that's a hobby. It's not a spiritual hobby. Pickleball is fine, but pedantic pickleball, not a hobby. You can retort with capitulate. So capitulate is an antiquated or old word for surrender. So it says, impressed by those who visited him at the hospital. So again, we go out to seek them, to find them, to work with. He capitulated, surrendered entirely, when later in an upper room of this house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. Our examples of our own life of the cycle of alcoholism, what it's like to not be able to control our drinking, what it is like to not be able to stay sober on our own power. And, that's where war stories aren't super helpful at the body of the hall, like in a meeting and be like, and it's me. So, and then I pissed behind a dumpster, you know what I mean? That's not necessarily helpful. Although I did a step one talk a couple days ago, and I'm like, I'm gonna class it up. So I'm like, I came to covered in vomit in the bathroom. It's like, oh, pinky's up because I'm a classy lady now. The bar for me is low. But that's where my war stories get to be helpful. When I hear somebody share about their drinking experience or their using experience, and I get to match their experience with one of mine, man, that is useful. Hey, me too. I did that there, and they can see that they're not alone. And I get to punch through with my stories. Not we use our words, we don't hit anyone, but we got to punch through that denial and that delusion, right? Page 30, the delusion that we may be like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. So it says, so he surrendered, capitulated entirely when later in an upper room of this house, he heard the story of some man whose experience closely tallied with his own. The expression on the faces of the women, that indefinable something in the eyes of the men. And if you remember on page 9, so on page 9, it's in Bill's story. Abby Thatcher shows up. And it's the first full paragraph, about middle of the page, on page 9. It says the door opened and he stood there fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? Well, it was a spiritual awakening, the indefinable something in the eyes of the men, of the people who had recovered. There is a light that is on, man. And I will tell you, it is not my light. I was dim when I got here. You know what I mean? The dimmer switch was all the way down. And man, if I don't do this work, you know how some people are like, Paige, it's a little much. Ooh, like, ooh, it gets turned right down, but if I do this thing, it's full blast and I can't stop it. So back on page 160, the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place. And you know what, that feeling, if you remember, your first meeting or your first few meetings, you probably don't remember what was said. You probably don't remember, but you remember a feeling. There's a feeling there, something that is ineffable, it is indescribable. And again, we know what it's like to go to a meeting, not a solution, but man, we can go and be amazingly lifted up. Not as lifted up as if we're going to go work with somebody, find somebody to work with and take them through the steps. Ooh, that is an elevator. You know what I mean? Oh, we just got to go right up. So the stimulating and electric atmosphere of the place conspired to let him know that here was haven at last, and haven is safe harbor. Here is safety. Now, I haven't double checked this, but I believe in the original manuscript, it might have said heaven, because all instances of heaven that were in the original manuscript were taken out and replaced with words like haven or utopia, because they wanted to make sure that there was nothing in this book that would be offensive to any religion. And so they ran it by some religious folk who were like, hey, heaven cannot be here. Heaven is over there, sort of thing, And so they're like, okay, we'll take that out because we're not fighting anyone, especially on theology. So it says, and this is what I think is really important. This next little paragraph, this is who I am called to show up as. And how I am called to show up to meetings, who I am called to be, to create this atmosphere for others. The very practical approach to his problems. And I promise you, if it is spiritual, it is practical. There is a real practicality to this spiritual way of life. There is a real practicality to these 12 steps. Like, really, it doesn't look like it before I do it. You know what I mean? I come to 12 step and I got my bundle of problems and I'm like, somebody fix my problems. And my sponsor's like, let's do some inventory. And it's like, what are you out of your mind? Do you not see my bundle of problems? You know what I mean? And they're like, go help somebody. I'm like, but my problems. Can we talk about my problems? And it's like, go help somebody, or, like, go pray, go meditate. It's like, but my problems, But I promise you, if we do it, we see that it is a real practical approach. And it was so funny. I was just before we were talking about some of these writers and authors who influenced, or the Oxford group, who then influenced Alcoholics Anonymous, and there was this one gal whose name is escaping me at the moment. I won't look it up, but she wrote this book about practical mysticism and the practicality of spirituality. And man, you know what it's like when there is somebody that is like truly and profoundly and deeply changed by this work. It's like they're grounded in something different. And you know what it's like when somebody's just like, yeah, no, everything's great. I'm doing so great. Everything's great. I'm so spiritual. Oh, you know what I mean? We know what that's like. And spirituality roots me in something deeper. This way of life roots me in something deeper. So the practical approach to its problems, the absence of intolerance of any kind. I know, it's a tall order. I need God to take me there. I can't get there on my own. Inventory will get me there, prayer will get me there, yeah. But yeah, the absence of intolerance of any kind, the informality, you know what I mean? And some of you are like, yes, girl, is that your brand new inside hoodie that you're gonna wear all week? Yes, the informality. That's not what we're talking about. But that comfortability, that warmth, that like, hey, you're welcome here, the genuine democracy, that we're all equal and we're all working together towards a goal, and my voice isn't louder. Yeah, it was Evelyn Underhill, Practical Mysticism. Heck yeah, that's the one. And in it, she was like, actually, I disagree with William James and his assessment of the qualities of a spiritual awakening. And I'm like, oh, delightful. I love this discourse so much. And that's just a sort of nerdy tangent about like 1800s authors that I'm like, oh, fight it out. Yeah. But as we go back to absence of intolerance, so the informality, the genuine democracy, the uncanny understanding. And you know what it's like when somebody's like, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. I went through that. Yes, me too. I experienced that. The uncanny understanding which these people had were irresistible. He and his wife would leave elated, and I want to point something out, elated with what? By the thought of what they could now do for some stricken acquaintance and his family. And one of the things I point out is the most sure sign of a spiritual awakening is the desire to go help somebody else. Now, if you're here today and you're like, I don't want to help people, that means I haven't had a spiritual awakening. I can't help. No. So oftentimes we got to go do to have the experience. Go do, go help, go work with others, go take them through these steps. So, but that they would leave elated by the thought of what could I do for somebody else? And it says they knew they had a host of friends. It seemed that they had known these strangers always. They had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. And man, isn't it the thing? You come to the rooms, or actually, one of my most ignored suggestions is to hit a meeting while you're out of town. And that one, I don't know why it's ignored, because I'm like, that's delightful. And if you go somewhere, they'll like take you around and show you the place. Like, it's fun. But you know what it's like to travel and to show up at a meeting in a place where you know no one. Or, in the early days of Zoom, man, that was the cheapest way to travel, is to Zoom around. You know what I mean? Didn't even have to take off my shoes for security, to get on the plane. It was great. And you connect with these people right away, right? You go to a meeting and it's like, man, it's like I've known you for my whole life. There's a fast intimacy that happens. And really, it's so cool. So if you do get the chance, feel free to ignore me, but go to a meeting when you're out of town. They had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. If you remember in the forward to the second edition, it said a wholesale miracle had taken place. Wholesale. That's like getting miracles at Costco. And again, they're showing up to the rooms and they see a miracle before them. Well, keep in mind, it is nothing less than miraculous to see a sober, contented alcoholic, to see a recovered addict, to see a compulsive whatever brings you here free of the compulsion to act out on that behavior. You know what I'm saying? That is nothing less than a miracle. And one was to come to them. They knew it. That's the message I've got to share, They had visioned the capital G, capital R, great reality. They're loving, and capital A, capital P, capital C, loving, all powerful creator. So great reality, it's a metaphor for God. We're pointing to God or higher power and their loving, all powerful creator. And where did they get a vision of this power? Where do I get a vision that there could be a power greater than myself? Well, experientially, when I got here, I saw people that were happy and recovered at the same time. That's where I began to see it. And again, as somebody who is now recovered, not cured, but recovered, that is my responsibility to others, to be a light for those that are in the darkness. So it says, now this house will hardly accommodate its weekly visitors, for they number 60 or 80 as a rule. So regular attendance, 80, Alcoholics are being attracted from far and near, from surrounding towns. Families drive long distances to be present. A community 30 miles away, that's Cleveland. Just if you didn't want to have to get out your Google Maps and figure out 30 miles, Cleveland has 15 fellows of Alcoholics Anonymous. Being a large place, we think that someday its fellowship will number many hundreds. And again, Cleveland, yeah, they got more than many hundreds there. I mean, I only went to one meeting while I was there, but I could extrapolate from the other meetings that they have. They got more than many hundreds. But life among Alcoholics Anonymous is more than. So it is this, but more than this. Attending gatherings and visiting hospitals, cleaning up old scrapes, helping to settle family differences, explaining the disinherited son to his irate parents. Probably had to do that with the devil may care chap, Ernie Galbraith, to explain him. Lending money. Now, we got some real things about lending money, like we got a whole look in working with others about like, hey, hold on though. It's not the matter of giving that is in question, but when and how to give, we want to use hard on the discernment, No, like rare, that's not a common thing. And it says, and securing jobs for each other. And here is point, when justified. So contextualizing this. No one, and this is important, no one, if you're here today, even you, no one is too discredited or is sunk too low to be welcomed cordially. Cordially welcomed. That with that friendliness and that warmth, and we're genuinely glad you're here if he means business. If you want to get well, man, we're glad you're here. And if you don't want to get well, I'm glad you're here anyways. Keep coming. Something, you might get a little, listen, you might be like, okay, there might be an answer. And if not, like the pain of this illness is going to drive you to do some action. So you're just glad you're here. Social distinctions, petty rivalries, and jealousies. These are laughed out of countenance. Like that's not a thing. And so if you're finding, hey, that's a thing in your life, or that's a thing that you're finding in your home group, that's something for me to inventory about me and to look at within me. Because these are the conditions in which a meeting can flourish. It's hard to flourish if we got social distinctions. And some of you are like, Paige, you are not climbing any social ladders. But those rivalries and jealousy. And this, man, the laughed out of countenance. This line I love. Being wrecked in the same vessel, being restored and united under one God, with hearts and minds attuned to the welfare of others. The things which matter so much to some people no longer signify much to them. How could they? You see, we come here being wrecked in the same vessel. That is the vessel of our physical allergy and our mental obsession. And if you guys, I'm like, man, I'm doing not great for time in the sense like this is going to be a natural stopping point to explain this paragraph. But I'm like, oh, that means we'll be going on again next week. And I didn't wrap this up this week. And next week we might wrap up a little early because it's only a couple pages. So y'all, please bear with me. But when we talk about being wrecked in the same vessel, we can make a note and pop over to page 17. And on page 17, page 17, we talk about, and it's the second full paragraph where it says we're average Americans, all sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. And here is the tie-in. Page 17, we are like the passengers of a great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck. And the shipwreck is my alcoholism, my addiction, my compulsive behavior that brings me to this study. And the metaphor here is the Titanic disaster. Now, if it's helpful, the Titanic sunk in 1912. So it would be a disaster that was sort of in the modern consciousness in 1939, but not super recent that it would be like super touchy of a disaster. And so what is the Titanic of my life? Do you know what I mean? What is the sinking ship of my life? The first thing that makes the ship go under is that I cannot control the amount I take once I start. But the real iceberg, the real danger is that I can't stop myself. So it's the physical allergy, but more important than that, that mental obsession that compels me to drink or to use or to act compulsively against my will. And that is what throws me into the North Atlantic seas. And I come to the room's a 12-step, and it's like I got this little lifeboat. You know what I mean? And we're like, whew, we survived. We have this common peril, the North Atlantic of my alcoholism, or my addiction or whatever brings you here. We are passengers of the great liner the moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Steerage is the bottom rung, and captain table is the top. But it goes on to say, unlike the feelings of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our individual ways. The feeling of having shared a common peril, that's our common problem, physical allergy, mental obsession, is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would never have held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. That common solution is the spiritual awakening. And it says, upon which we can agree, on which we can join in brotherly, on which we can absolutely agree, and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. The action is the 12 steps. And so when we go back to page 161, I'm gonna go slowly, just because I know we're all scooting around. I do this. I'm the problem. We'll do inventory on me after if you want. It talks about being wrecked in the same vessel. So that common peril. Being restored and united under one God, that spiritual awakening. And what's the most sure sign of a spiritual awakening? The desire to help somebody, with hearts and minds attuned to the welfare of others. My very life as an ex-prom drinker depends upon my constant thought of others and how I might help meet their needs. And says the things which matter so much to some people no longer signify much to them. How could they? And isn't that a beautiful tie-in to our third step promises, where I begin to let go, of my little plans and designs. I begin to let go of the bondage of self. And I begin to awaken to this great reality, something that is more than just my illness, more than just myself, something deeper and more profound. I get to be a light for those that are in the darkness. I get to help those who are drowning in their own North Atlantic Sea. And that gives my pain meaning and purpose. And that is the hour. So I will wrap it up, and we will pick up next week, where we will finally wrap up the 164. The following week, we'll start from the very, very, very beginning. So invite people, or don't. I mean, it's consensual, but invite people if you'd like. It's more fun if there's people here. It's less fun if it's just me. And keep in mind next week, well, we'll see. I've been known to take an hour on things that shouldn't take an hour. So thank you guys for coming. I'll stop the recording and we'll wrap it up with a prayer.